Welcome back to the Explainer. Okay, I am so incredibly pumped to have you here today because we're taking a little step back from our usual data-heavy deep dives, and instead, we're visually mapping out something truly spine-chilling. We are going to break down a verified, true horror account that perfectly illustrates just how quickly a totally ordinary, everyday situation can spiral into pure terror. I've structured this entire narrative across our Explainer today so we can really examine every bizarre detail and the exact timeline of this paranormal encounter. So dim the lights, grab a snack, and let's get right into it. So I want you to keep this question right in the back of your mind as we go through the Explainer today. What actually happens when a late night delivery leads you to a house that's been abandoned for 3 whole years? I mean, just think about the logic of that for a second. There's no way that makes sense, right? Well, we're going to trace the exact steps of a young guy who walked right into this impossible scenario. To figure out how this even happened, we first need to look at our protagonist. Let's call him John. John was your typical college student, working a part-time job at a local pizza shop just to make ends meet. He was desperate for some extra cash, which is a super relatable motivation, and it completely grounds the decisions he made that night. He definitely wasn't out looking for a thrill. The guy was literally just trying to pay his bills. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture the scene. It's exactly 1 a.m. The shop is closing up, John's shift is technically over, and he's more than ready to just head home and sleep. But then, the phone rings. On the other end is this hesitant, really low voice caller asking for 4 large pizzas. Now, initially, John wanted to refuse, obviously. The shop's closed. But a massive order like that right at closing time almost always means a huge tip. And as we just talked about, John really needed that money. To put this into perspective and ground this supernatural story in reality, let's trace his exact timeline. By 1:15 a.m., the massive order is boxed up and ready, and John takes the delivery. He hops on his delivery bike and drives for a solid 30 minutes. At 1:45 a.m., he finally arrives at the address. But you have to understand, this wasn't just a quick run down a suburban block. He's driven way past the city limits and deep, deep into an isolated forest. Now, notice the crazy shift in environment here. On one hand, you've got the city where John started, right? Bright, populated, safe. And on the other hand, you have the outskirts where this address actually is. It's an unpaved, bumpy dirt road. There's dense, wild forest encroaching on both sides of him, and absolutely zero streetlights. John is plunged into total creeping isolation. It is pitch black out there except for his single little bike headlight. And when he finally rolls up to the destination, this is what greets him. An incredibly old, pitch-black house just sitting there silently in the deep woods. No porch lights on, no movement in any of the windows. Just a complete and utter lack of visible life. Honestly, it looks completely abandoned, like nobody has stepped foot inside of it for years. So John is practically frozen. He's in this terrifying psychological trap. He does the smart thing and calls his manager, hoping he can just take the pizzas back. But the manager's probably asleep and doesn't pick up. And this leads John to a really agonizing realization. If he returns with 4 unpaid large pizzas without permission, his boss is going to deduct the cost directly from his already tiny paycheck. And in that moment, his fear of losing money actually outweighs his fear of the dark. So John forces himself to walk up to the house. He rings the doorbell balancing these heavy pizzas. No answer. He rings it again. He can hear faint footsteps inside, but still, nobody comes to the door. Just as his nerves are completely shot and he literally turns around to leave, a single, dim light flicks on inside. And then, slowly, the front door swings open entirely on its own. It's almost like the house itself is inviting him to come inside. Just imagine being in his shoes right now. John steps through the open door and into a hallway. The lighting is super dim and just deeply unsettling. There is complete, heavy silence. No hum of an AC, no fridge running, nothing. Just the echoing sound of his own hesitant footsteps. He nervously calls out into the empty house, "Hello, pizza delivery," hoping some normal, everyday guy is just going to walk around the corner with a $20 bill. But it's not a person. Out of nowhere, movement catches his eye. A wild, black cat suddenly darts out from underneath this dusty old sofa in the hall. It sprints across the floor and vanishes straight into an adjacent pitch-black room. John is startled, obviously, but he thinks, okay, someone must be in there with their pet. so he slowly follows the cat toward the open doorway, completely unaware of what is actually waiting for him inside. This is where things get absolutely wild. The terror really builds through this shocking sensory disconnect. Notice the contrast here on the slide. As John steps into the room, he hears a TV suddenly flicker on, and then the distinct sound of small children laughing mischievously, almost like they're playing a prank on him. But what he actually sees with his own eyes is horrifying. Two little girls sitting on a bed. They aren't laughing, they aren't moving, they are sitting perfectly still, staring dead at him with completely unblinking eyes. Now, John's brain is basically doing gymnastics trying to rationalize this. He's incredibly creeped out, but he convinces himself this is just some weird, elaborate prank by awful customers. Annoyed and totally over it, he just blurts out, "I'm here to deliver pizza. Is there an adult I can get the payment from?" He just wants his cash so he can get out of this nightmare. But the second he demands payment, the whole vibe just shatters. The two little girls don't move from the bed, but their eyes suddenly roll back, turning completely stark white. And that dead silence they had going on, it instantly morphs into this loud, dangerous, genuinely chilling laugh echoing off the bedroom walls. That is the exact millisecond John realizes, okay, I'm not dealing with a prank. I am dealing with something supernatural. The two girls slowly lift their hands up and point straight at the doorway. John turns around to look, and right there, blocking his only exit, is the apparition. It's this terrifying, towering, completely dark female shadow just standing silently right behind him. The air in the room goes freezing cold, and the reality of what he's looking at just hits him like a freight train. At this point, pure, unadulterated fight or flight kicks in. In sheer terror, John drops all 4 large pizzas smack onto the floor. He dodges the dark shadow, sprints out of the room, and tears through that dim hallway as fast as his legs can possibly move. He bursts out the front door into the pitch-black night, running frantically toward his parked bike. He knows it is literally his only ticket out of this forest. He practically vaults onto his bike, kicks the starter, and tries to speed away down the dirt road. But almost instantly, the engine starts to sputter violently. This loud, awful grating noise fills the air. He looks down and realizes with absolute dread that his tire is completely punctured. Within seconds, the bike just dies entirely. His only lifeline has failed him in the middle of nowhere. So now he's stranded, it's pitch black, he's trembling uncontrollably, and he whips out his phone to frantically dial the police, begging for them to come help. And as he's on the phone, his eyes dart down to the bike's rearview mirror. Right there, reflected in the glass and lit up by the moon, he sees them. The dark female shadow and the 2 little girls are out of the house. They're on the dirt road, and they are slowly, deliberately walking toward him. Total panic mode. He ditches the broken bike right there in the dirt, sprints off the path, and dives headfirst into the dense, wild forest. He finds this massive tree, curls up tightly behind it in the absolute dark, and he is literally praying for his life, straining to hear any footsteps coming his way. He hides out there in pure terror until, finally, he hears the distant wail of police sirens cutting through the night. The immediate tension finally breaks. The cops roll up with their lights flashing, and they secure John and his abandoned bike. John is shaking like a leaf, but he explains everything and points them right to the house. The officers draw their weapons and conduct a full tactical sweep of the entire property. But they find absolutely nothing. No little girls, no shadow figure, just that same wild black cat roaming the empty halls. The chilling truth, what John discovered the very next morning. So, here is the crucial, terrifying detail. 3 years. That is exactly how long this house had been totally vacant. There was no electricity hooked up, nobody had lived there. It had been sealed up tight, just rotting away out in the forest for 3 long years before John ever stepped foot on that front porch. And why was it abandoned? Well, this is the truly heartbreaking and terrifying part. Exactly 3 years prior, a mother and her 2 little girls were brutally murdered inside that very house. The investigation went completely cold, and the killer was never found. So John instantly realizes that the dark shadow blocking the door and those 2 little girls with the stark white eyes, those were the spirits of that slain family, still trapped inside their home. Obviously, the aftermath was pretty immediate. John quit his part-time delivery job that very morning. He never, ever delivered another pizza. According to the source material, even years later, the guy still visibly shivers whenever he thinks about that pitch-black dirt road. The psychological scar of stepping right into the unknown and coming face to face with this unsolved tragedy, it really continues to haunt him to this day. But as we wrap up this explainer, I have to leave you with one detail of this case that just defies all logic. If that house was completely empty, with zero power, and the mother and her 2 daughters had been dead for 3 years, who was the hesitant, low-voiced man who made the 1 a.m. phone call to order those 4 pizzas in the first place? Was it just some incredibly sick prank? Or was it the killer, still out there, watching the house? Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer today. I want you to think about that tonight, and I will see you in our next deep dive.